I'm delighted to invite the second half of this panel. I'm joined by Elizabeth Trudeau, who is the Acting Secretary for Global Public Affairs in the United States. Thank you for joining us. Next to her, we have Motunrayo Alaka, who is the CEO, Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism in Nigeria. Thank you for making the time. And we also have Guillermo Arias, who is a photojournalist in Mexico. So perhaps we can begin with you, Mrs. Trudeau. Give us an impression of what you think about some of the things that were said, the challenges that journalists face during war times.
Thank you. It's significant. I think our previous panel really put a fine point on that. Our colleague from Ukraine spoke eloquently on this. And I'd also like to thank Claudia and our hosts yesterday with the G7 media ministers, where we were very focused on this. One of the things that, and I'm thrilled to be with my colleagues here from Nigeria and Mexico, journalists in conflict is a global phenomenon. And one thing, and I say this on behalf of my country, and we approach this with humility, is that none of us are immune to this. None of us are immune to seeing media and journalists impacted by conflict. And what I'm very concerned about and what we're very focused on is providing the tools, the resources, and also the visibility for people around the world: Nigeria, Mexico, Yemen, Syria, Libya. Journalists in conflict, this is an ongoing issue. This is not something where our focus, and as an American, we have very short attention spans, where we can lose sight of this. And I think the G7 commitment, the commitment that we're making as a global community, needs to be intense, it needs to be focused, it needs to be pointed, and it needs to deliver results.
Right. So, Motunrayo, we heard earlier that one of the key problems for journalism during war times is attention span. And I'm just curious what happens, to borrow what Mrs. Trudeau is saying, when the conflict is not mega, as we are seeing in Ukraine right now, but sustained small conflicts throughout the years.
Okay, thank you. First, let me talk about the context of the issue we're talking about. So in Nigeria, there's a lot of infighting, the war within. So it's not as easy to define the enemy, like somebody from outside attacking us. In northern Nigeria, we have the issue of Boko Haram, which has been on as far back as 2002. But, the issues, the pining social, economic, cultural issues have been there way before that time. In southern, eastern Nigeria, we have the issue of, the IPOB and the issue with secessionist interests, people who want to be out of the country because they feel like they have been marginalized. In the Middle Belt, we still also have the issue of the farmers and the herders. So we're talking about pockets of fightings that when you put together, really, we're at war, but from outside, we look like we're okay. Mm-hmm. So a lot of imploding that is happening. And many of these have undertones of, issues of religion, issues of ethnicity, cultural differences. So, the reporter is very much in that society and very much a part of, those interests. And because our population is over 60% youth population, it also means that a lot of history is lost, a lot of the issues, the things, the nuances in what you see on social media, for instance, and how things are reported and how, you can talk about an issue in 280 characters, but it's way more nuanced and way more diverse than that. But somebody gets that information and runs with it. So the commissioner spoke about something really important, which was the issue of you getting indifferent. And we're getting to a point of numbing in Nigeria at this time, because in the last 1 month, for instance, we've had an attack on a train in Kaduna, which happened in March 28, and over 80 people were abducted. They have been eventually released. And then we've had, an attack in a church in southwest Nigeria, which generally speaking looks like there's not much conflict happening there. But on a Sunday, a church was attacked, and over 40 people were killed within the premises of a church. So you hear the number of deaths, you hear the number of attacks, you hear the number of adoptions, and journalists have to be in the middle of this to report. But there is a numbing that is happening to the people because not much is changing, and it looks like it is becoming widespread. It used to be something you say, oh, it's happening in this part of the country, but now it's everywhere. And then the youth generation, they are participating in their way. There was the HENSAS movement which happened last year, which was clear, telling us that the young people in Nigeria can actually stand up, they can organize, they can fight, they can speak up, and they did speak up. But there was also a lot of nuance lost, a lot of understanding lost, and a lot of fake news and a lot of misinformation and in fact disinformation in that space. So it becomes very difficult for a journalist to be able to then talk about all the ramifications of the story, be able to also connect with the humanity of the people. You see the blood, you see the woman who has lost all her children, you see the school that was there that is no longer there, and it's your society, it's your community. The soldiers, they are your citizens. So it's not as easy to just say they and we. You also have to understand the context. One of the reporters that we work with, we have a coalition of organizations that we are making sub-grants to for independent media and for reporting at the subnational level. And I reached out to say, how does it feel, reporting in a war area? And it said, we have to do some self-censorship. That because as important as reporting the deaths are, we don't want to demoralize our army because they are also affected, their families are affected. One of the reporters wrote to say on his journey to a particular war-torn area, he met a soldier and he asked him, have you been in the war? And he took his hand and he said, touch my chest. And he said, 4 bullets to my chest. And he's back on the street. So when you experience this as a reporter, it definitely touches you. And you're doing this on the background of, really shoestring, budgets and the rest.
Let me invite Guillermo to this, because what you're saying is something that's reflective in my own country of Kenya, where journalists will intentionally avoid bad news because they don't want to inflame populations. And so the question is, what is the role then of the journalist in these situations? Is it to uphold peace? Is it to narrate events, as I said earlier, or to contextualize them, as Angelina said before?
It's complicated. Hello, everybody. Well, at least in Mexico, with the drug war and organized crime war, most journalists limit their work to facts and numbers. They don't investigate much because it can make you kill if you start naming names and saying stuff.
Yeah.
And the same way as happening in your countries, our country our social tissue is broken. The organized crime spreads all over our society and our government even, and it's complicated.
I had a question regarding, journalists who work for foreign media, for example, who are based in, abroad, but they work for international organizations that are from the West. What responsibility do the governments, the Western governments, have over these journalists who are working on their behalf in not so safe areas?
Well, they're working on behalf of the public. They're not working on behalf of the government. I can speak to that. Though we have colleagues here from the Agency for Global Media who are wonderful, and I would encourage you to talk to them. But if you're talking about independent media, and something I want to be very clear, they're not working for the U.S. government, and good on them. That's their job. They're independent. They hold us to account too, including our relations with foreign countries. I would say, there's a couple of things I could say, and I've worked in Kenya, I've worked in Nigeria. I hope to work in Mexico if I get lucky. While I wouldn't speak for American colleagues who are serving abroad, they're better and they're richer and their reporting is more nuanced if they're in partnership with local outlets. And that's the truth. It's their job to contextualize, to get back to your previous panel. Parachute journalists are never the answer. Sometimes it's inevitable. But what you have a responsibility to do is to tell the story, to contextualize, to give the facts. And the most important thing to do is to understand the country you're reporting on. I'm a US diplomat. I've lived for years abroad. I will never understand a country as well as a Kenyan or a Nigerian or a Mexican. You have to acknowledge that. And journalists need to do the same thing.
Okay. To you, I pose the question about young people, which you spoke about earlier, and saying very rightly that 60% of the population, I believe it's even more, who are under the age of 35 in Nigeria. And yet, statistically, they're the ones who have the least amount of interest in the news. What does this mean for the future of democracy?
Well, I wouldn't say they don't have interest in the news. They do have interest in the news, but the way that they take news is different, and their attention span is way shorter. They don't want to read all the long text of the older generation. They want you to say it. So it is sometimes that creativity that can be missing in the legacy media. How do you say what you want to say, what you used to say in 1,000 words? How do you communicate it in 280 characters and make sense and be able to, review nuance? Almost impossible. So there's interest in news and there is interest in participation. However, there is also a lot of misinformation out there, such that, people call me and say, I saw this news on this news platform, and I say, well, that one was not true. But the news platform is supposed to be credible. And I'm like, well, it depends on sometimes it depends on the issue and all of that. Like, you have to check so many platforms. So the young people are engaging in their way. They're speaking a lot online. Unfortunately, though, what is democracy and what is development and what is really engagement, a lot of that happens offline. And so there's a lot of campaign encouraging young people to get off their phones and actually get on the streets to understand the issues, to be able to participate in such a way that from the knowledge that they have, rather than a couple of things you pick from Instagram or from Twitter. So there is the interest there. What we need is a huge mobilization of this energy of the young people, which, if you see the footages from the NSAS, it was amazing that so many young people could come together to say, we are against brutality of the police, many times on young Nigerians, a lot of extrajudicial killing, and they were so well organized, and they were able to pass their message across. I'm not sure that ultimately the movement achieved what it should achieve, but they were heard loud and clear, and it showed potential of what young people would be able to do if we're able to, organize in such a way that we use that energy, but we also, infuse a lot of knowledge, a lot of nuance into what they know.
And yet, Guillermo, despite the fact that we really want people to get off their phones and interact with each other one-on-one, statistically, most people are looking to social media for their news. So is it more important for a journalist right now, and this is something that John Stewart asked, to move the needle in terms of what we want, democracy, human rights, or to become viral?
Actually, I think that's that's one of the biggest problems, as mentioned by Mrs. Reza. We really need to slow down on social media and start to look over ourselves and the way we do journalism, the way we gather our information, the way we interact with the society at ground level, and try to open, to open we need to bring the discussion on how we do journalism. I think we owe to the society a big amount of disengagement, actually.
Do you have any ideas of how we can do that?
Well, first of all, try to be respectful, responsible with our sources at ground level. You know, you mentioned parachuting a few moments ago, and that's terrible because every time a foreign journalist came to Mexico to report a story and hire a fixer, and they came with a existing story of what they want to tell with a North American Eurocentric narrative, you know, and they just come and grab what they want to fill their stories, you know.
Yeah.
That's I think we owe that to our societies.
All right.
To look at ourselves. Sorry.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, I'd like to ask what the dangers are, or if you felt this permeate, the risks of underreporting certain places. Does it influence how people develop policies and laws, for example?
I think absolutely. And our colleague from Ukraine made that very clear. We saw that with the invasion and illegal annexation of Crimea. And then we are seeing that now. We're seeing interest fall off in conflicts around the world, DRC. We're seeing conflicts underreported. And you know, certainly for my country, I won't speak for others, public interest helps drive policy. And this is why Maria's points on how social media shapes public opinion is so critical. And it's also the responsibility of journalists. The United States has recently invested in the International Fund for, I have to write it down so I can get the name right, public interest media, which Maria is also associated with the idea that we need to build the infrastructure because we need to lift all voices. I think you're exactly right. There is a challenge and a huge risk, and actually a reality, that we become numb to news.
Yeah.
We become numb to tragedy. We're all poorer for that. We lose our humanity.
I'd like to give the members of the audience an opportunity to ask questions if they do have any. Oh, there we go, very fast. We've got one here and one at the back and two on this side. We'll go in that order. Please keep it brief. Tell us who you are and where you're coming from, and please stand up. Yes, there's a microphone that will be brought to you.
Ibrahimi. Hello.
Yes.
My name is Abdulaziz Ibrahimi. I'm from Kam, Afghanistan. Unfortunately, just Foreign Minister of Germany is told about Afghanistan. I think Afghan journalist is not member of global media because today I'm participate in global media. I'm not heard about Afghan journalists' problems, challenges, and threats. I hope the ministers and the general director of Deutsche Welle and the representative of the European Union talk about, and unfortunately we have a lot of problems. Yeah.
So what is your question, Abdulaziz?
Yeah. Today my question, you should invite a journalist from your
From Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, and they talk about the challenge and they support and they save and they support Afghan journalists to help Afghan journalists. Today, Afghan journalists is you forget every international countries and especially the global media. I just attention, please.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have
thank
a
you.
lot of talk. I have a lot of things about to tell everyone and the challenge and the problems. Yeah.
Yes, understood. I think we really appreciate your point, and we take note of that, although I'm sure they'll be represented in other panels. Although I will ask a question perhaps to you, Elizabeth, because it's not possible to take care of everyone from every part of the country all the time. So when you're sitting in the offices that you do, how do you prioritize?
We work with partners. We work with members of the G7, but more importantly, we work with countries all over the world. Maria raised the point, civil society is critically important. Independent fact checkers, building NGOs, coalitions. None of this can be possible alone. And I thank our colleague from Afghanistan for raising it. It's an important point, and I should have mentioned your country. Thank you.
All right, we've got a gentleman at the back there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I'm Osama Nazali from the occupied Palestinian territory. Human rights are indivisible, and in light of this, I would like to ask the representative of the United States, Ms. Elizabeth, concerning the killing of the Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh by the Israeli occupation forces just 41 days ago. How can we encourage and work with the international justice system to bring justice to victimized Shireen Abu Akleh and her family, and press the governments who practice such crimes to stop? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think you're aware. First, we mourn with the Palestinian journalist community. She was a grave loss, not only to American journalism, but to Palestinian journalists as well. She was a good contact of the United States, an American citizen. Secretary Blinken, my boss, has called for a transparent, thorough investigation, and he's also called for accountability. The United States has called for that, and we'll work with our partners to make sure that happens.
We had two questions. Yes, the lady with the striped shirt here, and the gentleman with the glasses at the back.
So I start. My name is Muzaffar Mahmoud from Muslim Television Ahmadiyya. In Germany, we say that the first thing which dies in wars is the truth. And of course, one truth is that wars always creates block, like they and us, and we and they. So at the end, on both sides, there are human beings. So my question is, for the day after the war, what does the panel think could be done now in this situation that those geopolitical blocks and walls could be destroyed to de-escalate the situation?
Right, great question. Thank you. Guillermo, do you want to take that? How do we break down the walls of division after physical wars are over, psychological war?
Well, we need to recognize each other as persons, as individuals, you know, with the same needs. Stuff. Yeah, I think that's that.
Okay. Do you want to add to that?
Yes, I would like to add to that. We need to have more conversations. Conversations, you know, sometimes when journalists approach stories, I have a model that I call RUSH, report until something happens, and it is built around the fact that journalists need to be more humble when approaching stories in terms of not just getting a source, but understanding that your source is a resource person, and you can learn from that person. So journalists can enable conversations between different groups that's on a very neutral ground. For instance, under one of our projects at the office in Nigeria, the Civic Space Guard project, we brought different people, including the Nigerian police. And these are people where maybe on Twitter they're attacking one another, but we are giving them a protocol. We want to have respectful discussion about this issue. We want us to listen to one another. And you know, we left the meeting. Yes, we could not solve all of our problems, of course, in a 2-hour, 3-hour meeting, but we left the meeting with a better understanding of the challenges of the Nigerian police, for instance, a better understanding of the perspective of the Nigerian youth that is agitating, a better understanding of the role of, you know, the non-governmental organizations. So conversations, they help us understand one another better, and they can be therapeutic to those people who better understand, you know, the why, the how, you know, of what had happened.
It sounds to me that the role of the journalist seems to be expanding further and further. Right now, you've said therapist almost, being a mediator and moderator. So who takes care of the journalists?
Well, it's a big question. One of the biggest issues for journalists covering conflict areas in Nigeria, and I'm sure around the world, is the trauma of what you see, what you experience, the sounds, the trauma that you go through. And in Nigeria, we do not have enough, and I'm sure many countries also need more help in terms of, being able to support journalists with the help that they need. There's also a cultural angle, though, in Nigeria, the fact that, there is something about going to see a psychologist, like people feel like you're not crazy, so why do you want to see a psychologist? So there's that cultural undertone where people say, I'm okay, and there's a cultural undertone where people say, deal with it, it's just one of those things. So, but we need to be upfront about it. And there's so many media organizations now coming up with, you can see a psychologist, you can speak to someone. Mental health safety is now more and more a topic in Nigeria. The safety of the life of the journalist. We did a research in 2020 where we were checking, the support that journalists get for covering COVID-19. And one of the major issues that people highlighted was the lack of insurance. The fact that, this is a pandemic that could kill them, and while they are alive or if they die, there will be no care for them or their family if they were gone. So how do you go expose yourself to reporting when you're going through that? These are part of the challenges. There's also the equipment and, the funds challenge to be able to cover story. So definitely we say that, the stories are critical. We must tell the story, and we must tell them truthfully as best as we can. But the life of the journalist that is telling the story.
All right.
Really matters.
I'd actually like to ask Angelina a follow-up question regarding this. So if you can get a microphone to her. You said earlier that at the moment you're just working, you're just surviving. And I'm curious if mental health, because you talked about doctors still working, if it's still something that's accessible to you as a journalist at the moment. Mental health services.
The question, can I very quickly pick up on the question about what could be done? Oh my God, it's double voice. It's really, yeah. I think what we need is justice. There is no reconciliation without justice. That's a very quick answer to that question. As to mental health, of course, not many of us has an opportunity to go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist during the war.
Yeah.
But what really helps is a conscious approach in a new newsroom when an editor knows that he or she needs to speak to his or her journalists. After each assignment, you just talk to your people. You just ask them, how did it go? Do you need a day off? Do you need more work to deal with it? Just talk and be conscious about it. I think it's a very important point, which is not so, among journalists and war reporters who are all like tough people, it's not a common thing to do, just to acknowledge that you're having a hard time.
Okay. And the final question, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I'm Caroline Wiemer, working for the Fondation Hirondelle based in Switzerland. We work in crisis zone with journalists. My question is, how do you see the journalist in 10 years? It's a field where probably nobody wants to go to work in because of the danger, the financial precarity, the political pressure. We are training young journalists, but what can we tell them to stay in the industry? Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I think all of the above. When I speak with younger colleagues and ask me what can they expect of the future or the career, I tell them, you know what, it's super complicated. If you want to be, I don't know, whatever, do it. Because it's true. And especially in places of the, I don't want to say third world, but third world. where we don't even have a social security for people, for our colleagues, where the salary of a journalist is less than 360 euros a month in average, so it can get lower than that. It's really complicated, and I'm not sure we all gonna make it in 10
Guillermo,
years.
are you telling me that when people come asking you how to be journalists, your answer is don't?
Yeah. Pretty much. Well, of course, I said if you want to do it, but it's a long-term road. You know, it's a marathon.
Yeah.
It's not a sprint.
Okay.
And
So
unfortunately, there's a lot of people youngsters that just want the easy like and be social and sorry.
all right. So this is a very positive note to end this to end this panel on. But I think I'd like some final thoughts. We've got about a minute left of what we can do to change this perspective, so that young people are not scared out of the profession, so that they don't have to endure what Mrs. Bressa did in order to be successful.
Journalism matters. It matters now more than ever. We count on you. And you know, it's altruistic, but it's important. It's the most important front line for democracy right now.
Yes, I'll pick it up from that note to say we collaborate, you know, for truth. And we showcase those people who, yes, some of them have paid a high price, but they have also been able to save many lives. I really believe, and I joined this profession as a young person, a much younger person. I really believe that journalism is a noble profession. It's the most noble even now for you to be in. And I'm telling a lot of young people that, but we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate more. We need to tell the stories of journalists who have been able to, you know, excel in their work. And we need to push the narrative of what excelling is. Yes, you must be able to pay your bills. Yes, you must be able to live well, but making an impact in the lives of people, being able to see a society where people are able to have access to, you know, good things of life wherever they come from. It is a good will to excel.
All right, Guillermo, some good news for us?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Journalism matters, but we need to be humble. Journalist is just the information taker. You know, it's not about the journalist as much as the journalism and the information that helps society or our societies. So I think we need to step down and be a little bit humble and yeah.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank Guillermo Arias, Motunrayo Alaka, and Elizabeth Trudeau.
Where are you from?